We're diving into another episode of the Talkin Solutions Podcast. And in this episode, I had the Director of Communications of the Media Development Investment Fund, Mr. Peter Whitehead, joining the show. And Peter, thanks so much for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me, Will.
Peter, I always love to ask this at the very beginning so that the context is there and it's available for the listeners and things of that nature as well. And you, of course, can always do it better than I. Can you explain to us exactly the great solution and what Media Development Investment Fund does as a whole?
Okay, so the great solution, the problem and the solution. The problem is a lack of independent media. So by which I mean reliable, quality news and information. I know the whole world suffers from it to different degrees, but we're talking particularly about emerging markets. So there's a deficit of this reliable information, and MDIF comes along to try and solve that issue or be part of the solution to that issue. And we're particularly focused on developing businesses, helping media businesses develop their own income streams and audiences so they can say no to dirty money, so they don't have to rely on governments, oligarchs, vested interests of any kind who might seek to interfere with their editorial. So that's our problem and solution.
Fantastic. And just let's dive into that problem a little bit more, because I think for some people, specifically people that may live in, the US or Canada or the UK and Europe and things of that nature as well, it's something that in our generations we really haven't had to think about. But what happens when there is no independent media to a country? What are some things that can occur if there is no independent media, or if there is a media that is, like you said, tied to the government or tied to oligarchs or tied to any type of separate organization that might influence what they write?
Well, independent media really do underpin, I would say they underpin the whole of democracy. They underpin economic development and democratic development, both social development also, in the sense that independent media are absolutely key to holding governments to account, businesses to account, to make sure that we, as people, as citizens, have a voice or heard or listened to, and actually that our interests are responded to. So, in lots of countries, those mechanisms just don't exist. So what would happen is that the most media institutions, whether it's traditional newsprint or TV, radio, online, whatever it may be, are owned by governments, by political parties who constantly seek to control the narrative. I know that in all of our countries, even democratic countries, of course, governments wanted to direct the narrative, but it goes without any kind of check. In so many countries around the world, a vast proportion of people in the world live in countries where the press isn't free.
Yeah, and that's something that can lead to a lot of issues, as you just talked about, and things of that nature as well. And historically speaking, are there some examples that you can kind of give that are kind of specific and things of that nature as well that you might kind of see, or ways that you can kind of see that as examples that can kind of put it into perspective a little bit for the listeners?
So just to give some sort of concrete examples of the type of sort of accountability, if you like, that the media can help foster. Your corruption is obviously such an endemic problem across so many countries, and corruption happens when people are not held to account. So when the powerful are not, there's no exposure of their misdeeds, of their, whether it's misallocation of resources, whether it's effectively theft to some extent. And independent media in lots of circumstances can actually shine the light and say, hey, this is not right. So, for example, we've worked with media in Guatemala, for example, where one of the most corrupt countries in the world, where the problem has been going on for decades and it passes from one government to the next. But even so, we've worked with a fantastic news outlet there, El Periodico, and over nearly 20 years, pretty much, they have been exposing successive governments' corruption. So the founder and the director of the publication is, as we speak, is in jail. He's been in jail for nearly 2 weeks now and is not expected to get out anytime soon. So the government have trumped up charges on money laundering, I think. That's such a common charge money laundering, and it's entirely unfounded. But it's a great way to silence his outlet, to stop him, shining a light on what the government doesn't want to be exposed.
Yeah, I think with journalism, for me, it's a topic that, hits home a little bit. That's why I studied in college. That's what I kind of did from a professional perspective, albeit very lightly because it was sports. So, and not investigative sports or anything of that nature as well. So I always think it's really important to kind of dive into what exactly the free press does and how important it is to democracy and things of that nature as well. So it's super important. Like, you look at the political climate today and you look at some of those, countries in the media, and it's a lot different than what it was maybe 20 years ago. And that could be attributed to the rise of the internet, social media, the transformation of advertising from print to digital, things of that nature as well. And then, but the one thing, and now they attack presidents, or presidents may, and I'm speaking primarily with the U.S. here from what I see. But, you see presidents may only take questions from, CNN or Fox from a national perspective. And one thing that I think gets really overshadowed now is that news is no longer hyper local as much as it really was, some years ago. I would be curious, as a professional who's been around here for a while, can you explain why local journalism is so important, and the fact that it's kind of dying in some areas, and why that's kind of so negative? Because to me personally, people get caught up in these issues, and they're important issues, but sometimes these issues have no effect on their actual day-to-day community, or even in their states, or things of that nature. So you just talk a little bit about some key differences there between the local and the national press, and why the local is really important to communities as well.
Yeah, well, I think it's a great point, and it's something that it's not unique to the US, but it is, I think, massively amplified in the US. I think, which is so used to having, every town has its paper. That was the way that that the printed press developed in the US, I think. And I think on a really simple level, it's that what I mentioned before, accountability. It's holding local town halls to account. It's to make sure that the procedures are followed in the, some of the most mundane things possible, to make sure that the proper procedures are followed in local government, that decisions are made properly, that, resources are allocated fairly. I think all of that is, super important. But it extends, beyond that accountability function, which is, as I say, is important. Locally and nationally and internationally, from healthcare, for example, for, during the COVID crisis we've been through, how important, locally and nationally to individuals was reliable information on the vaccine rollout, for example. There's been obviously such a lot of misinformation that's surged across the whole world, but the US has been very much part of that and has suffered massively from that. And having reliable local outlets that you can trust, and trust is such an important point that we may come back to at some point during our conversation. But if you have that level of trust, particularly on a local level, then I think you can take responsibility for your own actions, because you are acting with information that you think is reliable and that is reliable, and you can make valid decisions for yourself and about your own health or education or whatever other subject it may be.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's dive into that a little bit and talk a little bit about the trust, because that's obviously, I think, when you bring up the media today in parts of the UK and in the US and in, all across the world in some spots as well, media distrust has gone up quite a bit. People don't trust the media like they used to. I read that from a local perspective, they still trust it higher than a national perspective. But it's still just not there. And I definitely want to dive into the solution for MDIF, that's Media Development Investment Fund, and all the clients that you do, the financing y'all provide, and the success that they have. But I'd love to get your professional opinion as well on what do you think the biggest issues are with media today? And maybe we can select on a national level, since I think this is where it's most apparent, and for what I see, of course.
I mean, it depends. Are you talking about the US particularly, or globally?
I see this I'd love to get a.
Sorry, I think.
Yeah, I think
there's quite a difference. Sorry, we have a lag here. Yeah, please, you go.
Yeah, a bit of a lag, but yeah. So what it is I think from a global perspective, that would be great to share that. I think from a national perspective, in terms of like the U.S., I see this happening in the U.S., Australia, and in the U.K., where it's kind of similar, where you kind of have almost two parties with two different ways that they interpret the news that's best accustomed for maybe their individual party and things of that nature. And it kind of is very partisan news. It's not very in my opinion, objective. There's always, and look, you can't, as a journalist, it's very difficult to be 100% objective, right? Because you're a human being and you're always going to be writing with the choice of words, but you do your best in the way that goes. But I would be more curious to just see, in my opinion, that has to do with advertising and things of that nature as well. So just your professional opinion on what you kind of see from maybe that US, UK, Australia style level, and then maybe from a global level as well.
Well, I'm certainly I'm certainly not here to defend media companies in your country or in mine, in the UK or in Australia. There is a depressing amount of partisanship, and there's a depressing amount of media companies and journalists who are not following what I would call, effectively professional ethics. There's the factual news, which you say is one thing that we should all be able to agree on, but that isn't the case at the moment. I think the political agendas of the news companies are just so extreme, and their desperation to build audiences, and I think that is partly fueled by what they've seen on social media, and they've seen that stirring up emotions is a great way to attract an audience. And I think that has been that is a tactic that media companies on both sides of the Atlantic and beyond have used. And I think it's damaging for our democracies, and it's damaging for our people. And if we the sooner we can move past this, the better. I do fear for all of us to some extent with the partisanship, and it needs to come to an end. It's driving, I think, the political divide and the lack of conversation between the, generally speaking, two sides of politics. But it also reflects that. I think it's a little bit of both. And I think we're in a, well, I suppose the only saving feature to some extent is that there is plurality of news. So there are different sides. It's not as though, it's a lot of the countries we work in, there is only one side. There is the government side, and that is it. But at least there are some outlets that you can choose, different political aspects, political opinions, and you will be able to find some outlets that you can trust the factual nature of their reporting as well.
Yeah, and that is a luxury that we have. You're 100% right, and that's exactly kind of what I brought up at the beginning, which I think is really important, and why we're going to dive into that solution right now on that front is that we talk about our problems, and the problems have kind of evolved when you're in the US or the UK or more democratic countries with the press, because like you said, if you really want to, you can go read a CNN article or a Guardian article, and then you can go read the Daily Mail, and then you can go read Fox News or whatever. You can get kind of both sides of the aisle from the UK and the US, and there are a bunch of other ones as well. But the big issue is, from a global perspective, historically speaking, and why I think you all have such a fantastic solution, is that you're enabling these companies to kind of, in these countries that are maybe working on becoming more democratic, or where there is only one side, you're providing solutions to opportunities for they can either be more independent, where they're maybe not in, for lack of a better phrase, the pocket of another organization, or another completely different company that might be able to bring up different views and counteract these things and hold people accountable and things of that nature as well. So I'd love to kind of get into that portion of what MDIF does and the solution that you all have gotten, and what are some of the different ways, you touched on it briefly earlier, but what are some of the different ways that you all work within countries and kind of start with that process at the beginning and identify where you can provide a lot of value into kind of helping raise the press and these companies that are trying to create more freedom of press and create more free speech opportunities and hold governments and other entities accountable?
So we are a very unusual organization in that we are part human rights organization and part an investment fund. So as the name gives away, Media Development Investment Fund takes both of those elements. So we provide capital. We work from very much a business perspective, from a business point of view. The problem we're trying to solve, as I say, is the economic independence of independent media companies so that they can protect their editorial independence. So we provide equity financing and loan financing. We've been going for 25 years and have provided more than $250 million worth of financing in different ways. So we provide capital financing in lots of countries where we work. The only capital that a media company can borrow comes with strings attached, which comes back to that point that we mentioned earlier about political parties, entities actually managing to get a hold, get control, editorial control or interference of the companies to drive the agenda, to drive the news narrative. So we are trying to provide the levers that if you like, for media businesses to develop their own robust businesses, so they don't need to rely on these corrupt vested interests, if you like. So we'll provide a loan to a company on a low cost basis for maybe 5 years, 7 years, or an equity investment, and we also provide media management technical assistance. By that I mean that we will bring strategic advice and assistance in financial systems, in business plans, in digital advertising, whatever it may be, to try and give those businesses the edge over their competitors so they can perform well in the market and provide a return to us, because we're a not-for-profit, but we are an investment fund. So we make investments on an investment basis. We expect to get the money returned to us with interest or with returns on our equity investment. It doesn't always happen, but that's the intention of every single investment that we make.
Yeah, that's fantastic as well, right? I mean, you still have to run a good, proper business. And that's something that I think we saw with a lot of companies and, within the media industry as well, that kind of went belly up or things of that nature as well, is that maybe they didn't adapt and having that kind of equity to come in or those resources to grow. So I'd love to hear some success stories and what you've seen from working with clients. You mentioned the 5 years that it might be. I know that they can expect, 300-400% revenue growth, things of that nature as well. And in some cases, the companies that y'all have worked with. You mentioned Guatemala and the excellent work that, the El Periódico is and things of that nature. So I'd love to hear just a little bit more on some of the success that you guys have seen in the years that y'all have been working.
Well, we've been working for 26 years now, and in 45 countries. We started working in Eastern and Central Europe. So originally we were set up by a Serbian journalist and media manager to help media companies transitioning out of the former Soviet Union, out of communist systems, who weren't used to market systems, market forces, to try and help them develop the business skills they needed. And it developed quite quickly. We could see actually the same was, say, Indonesia, which is coming out of Suharto in the late 90s. They have similar problems, and the media there needed similar assistance. So, for example, if I can give a few concrete examples, in Malaysia. So Malaysia has been run by effectively one party, one controlling coalition since independence in the very early 1960s. And in 2018, for the first time, they were voted out of power. So there's been some kind of democracy in the sense that people are allowed to vote, but actually people aren't given the information to make decisions. And in 2018 was pretty much the first time that they really, Malaysia Kini, our client, was absolutely at the forefront of making sure everybody had the information. They provide information on every candidate standing for elections. They had election monitors reporting at the at the polling stations, as people voted and towards the declaration. They even called the count before anybody else, and that was the first transition of power away from the ruling coalition. And that was, again, for Malaysia Kini, that was 20 years of work, and we had been working with them for most of that time. Provided them with equity investments and all sorts of other, assistance. They do all the hard work. They're the ones who, and the brave work as well. You must say that, some of these guys face incredible pressure. I was mentioning before about El Periodico, and the founder who's in jail at the moment, he's suffered a mock execution in front of his family, 15 years ago or so. And these are the kinds of, the courage that some of these people take, and how seriously they take the mission of independent media, which I think shames us all, when it comes to, you see the media that some of the media anyway that we experience in our own countries, and it's almost another business. It's comparing apples and pears, really.
Yeah, it really is. And that's where I want to make sure that, it's a privilege. I mean, that we are discussing these issues and these problems, because like you said, they're just completely different. It's a completely different comparison. So you can't really put it into the same category, right? But they're different on that front. And, in my travels, I've been to Colombia, and I knew somebody who was volunteering, and he was from Europe, and he was coming in to volunteer. And it was back in 2019 when there was a bit of some uneasiness going on in Colombia at that time, and he was part of the paper, and he was getting death threats. They were getting death threats at the paper. Like, hey, if you come out and report these news, and things of that nature as well. And that's serious stuff. It takes a lot of courage, like you said, to go into that. And that's why I think the work that these people are doing is remarkable. And the passion, I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, but I imagine that the passion that they have for allowing their people to have freedom of choice with a great opportunity of information to make educated decisions, whether that's from a political perspective or a health perspective, whatever it might be. I would imagine these journalists and these people you work with are some of the most passionate people you come across.
I think you're absolutely right. They are. So, we work in Ukraine. So we've been working in Ukraine for 20 years, pretty much. And so we have, we work with about 5 companies in different parts of Ukraine when Russia invaded. We used to work in Russia as well, actually, until we were declared undesirable by the government in 2016. But so we can no longer work there. But we have clients in Ukraine, as I say, in some in the east of the country, in Melitopol and Kherson. Parts of the country that have been overrun now, that have been occupied, and Russia is now about to hold referenda in these places to take them into part of Russia. And the courage that they show is just, and their passion for, as you say, the passion for informing people, it is a calling. I think it really is a calling. And so when we start to work with a media company, what we do is we make sure we do our due diligence first to make sure that they produce editorial of the right quality, and they follow all the professional standards and produce quality material, and then we let them get on with it. So our mission is very much not to interfere in their editorial. Lots of media support organizations, which are great, do some great work, but a lot of them have a mandate to improve the standards of journalism. And ours is actually expressly not to do that. So if they hit a benchmark, then we help them develop a business around that journalism, which is very unusual in the media development world. So we are trying to help them, develop all those their resilience and their independence, but based on a really good system of journalism.
Yeah, that's fantastic. You talk about some of the, I guess, brief requirements that you look for and things of that nature as well. But how do you find these independent companies in these countries? Do you have countries that you kind of have identified where you kind of seek out and see what they're going? Are these people in organizations that are coming to you all, or how does that process kind of look?
Well, it's a bit of everything. So over the years we've tried lots of different ways, but actually one of the ways that tends not to work is by identifying a country and going there and visiting and meeting and finding out about all the media there. That tends not to be the best way. It often comes through reference, through word of mouth, through media that we've worked with, who hear about us in whatever form it may be. And yeah, I would say pretty much it's the best way is by referral from somebody who's worked with us.
Well, that's a staple in business, right? Referrals, word of mouth. That's always what makes the businesses churn, right? So, love to see it on that front, and totally makes sense that it obviously doesn't make a lot of I don't think a lot of people would like that, to identify one thing and then try to go in and do something about it on that front. So when you have these companies and you're working with them and you're kind of doing some investing, are you doing a lot of consulting with that as well? Or is it more just kind of monetary transactions on that front? Or is there some type of like resource work in terms of, hey, this is how you should kind of manage your finances, some business development practices and things of that nature?
Yeah, there's a lot of the second. There's a lot of the consultancy advisory that we provide that to all of our clients who want it. They don't all want it. Almost all of them do. One of the main reasons that they would want to work with us is for that. So it's partly for the capital, but also partly for the advisory. So we can provide, international expert, opinion on new business plans, on strategies, on advertising, whatever it may be, membership models, which is the currently very popular for digital news players. So we provide a lot of that to go with the financing, which not only it obviously helps those businesses directly, but also helps us de-risk our investments at the same time, because it's fair to say that our investments are pretty risky. And the sorts of country that we can work in lots of ways, it's almost the sort of the middle tier is our sweet spot, if you like. So we don't work in countries with an established food press. We just don't do that. And we can't work in the least developed, in either the least developed or the most repressive countries. So for example, China, we couldn't work in China because there is no independent media. And that's true in quite a lot of countries. But similarly, we couldn't work in South Sudan, where the market isn't strong enough to support an independent media. In countries like that, they're dependent on grants from media support organizations, which is great. It's the only way that they will have a chance to develop to the next level, where they might be able to take on a small loan or have prepared themselves for equity investment. So we work in that middle band. So countries everywhere from, India and Nepal to Brazil and Paraguay, Malawi, Botswana, that it's quite a broad category. But one thing that we also do in some countries that aren't quite ready for us, particularly countries that aren't quite ready for us, we do actually we've got some sort of standalone media development projects which support either innovation or support just to really help media businesses get onto that first rung. So we work in, say, Myanmar and Ethiopia, where the markets aren't, certainly in Myanmar now, but even in Ethiopia, the market is barely strong enough to support loans and investment. Just about, which I think it's just about there. But we can raise funds separately to provide them with small grants and lots of advisory, lots of consultancy to try and help them develop businesses that are strong enough to move on to the next step.
Yeah, that's interesting. What are kind of those first steps when you're in that? So take the Ethiopian example, and where they're barely kind of hanging in there and they can get started and things of that nature. What are some of the key things that they need to be doing to kind of develop themselves as a business, but also into that independency, so that they don't feel like they need to take any type of outside, influential money or anything like that?
Well, the first step in lots of cases is developing a business plan. So a journalist will have been working for perhaps a state institution or for some other media outlet and decides, hey, listen, I can do that. I'm an editor here. I want to run my own company. I want to run it better. I want to make sure it's independent. But that they start working it and running it, and might realize, but actually, how do you sell advertising? How do you prepare a rate card? So it can be simple steps like that to help them make their company more attractive and to make their company, understand what is needed, what the market will require. And also very often actually identifying functions within the company. You need a sales manager. Whereas, it may be that actually we've got 6 journalists and we hadn't really thought about much beyond that, but actually you need a sales team to support. You've got to invest in the sales team to support the editorial longer term. So it can be all of those, sort of simple steps, helping them decide on the right technology, for example, or, a really functional website design, a CRM, whatever it is. It's some of those simple steps that will provide the basics for them to build their business on.
Yeah, of course, that makes so much sense that you have to start. I mean, you're really taking these journalists and then you're saying, hey, what you are as a journalist, but now you need to start thinking like a business person as well. So it makes total sense that you start kind of from that ground up business plan perspective there on that front. I'd be curious to hear too about maybe some of the time and effort that it takes. I mean, you've mentioned working in countries for 20 years and it takes, that long to kind of grow with it. Is that a matter of getting them self-sufficient from a business perspective? Is it a matter of getting the public to raise their trust in that independent organization as well? Or like, what are some of the metrics that kind of go into how long it kind of takes for things to be efficient and effectively kind of run?
There are lots of factors. You've identified some of the most important there, but another overriding feature in lots of ways is the will of the government. So if a government decides, no, we're going back, we don't want any progression, then it can be very tough to counter that. So in lots of cases, I think the media we work with are just encouraging those steps, are moving along with it. We wouldn't say that, our client, Malaysia Kini, brought about democracy or, in Malaysia. That's not quite how it works. But they're a contributing factor to it. And if the politics change, then, our clients, the media we work with, that also changes. And also as well, the economic development of a country can make a massive difference. So, in the very early 2000s, we invested quite heavily in Southeast Europe, in former Yugoslavia. So as it was going through its civil wars, through the wars and the disintegration of former Yugoslavia, so in Croatia and Serbia and Montenegro, Kosovo, as it became as well. But so, for example, Croatia, we invested in Croatia, which at the time in 1999 or 2000, when we first worked there, was effectively run by an autocrat, by a dictator. And now it's a well-established member of the European Union. So it's, the country has been on a journey that has transformed the lives of people and the government as well. And our clients made a very small part of that, but they were part of that journey. And there's always the chance that, that we will experience this upside in any market we work in, but it doesn't always follow. So I mentioned Russia before. We worked in Russia. It was one of the first countries we worked in, and we worked there for must have been about 15 years, I think it was, until the Putin government in 2016 decided that we were an irritant, that we supported the independent media, which he did not. And so we were declared undesirable and banned, and it became illegal for anybody in Russia to contact us or for us to be in touch with anyone in Russia. So, that was a result of a hardening of the political line. And it wasn't, it's in those circumstances, we live with the cards we dealt with. Right.
You can't do anything if the people in power and control don't want you there, and they don't want to do anything. And that's always going to be a tremendous challenge. On the flip side of that, though, have you had experiences with governments and that where you have moved in and they're for it and they're supportive and things of that nature as well? Or is it when you do have the success, it's kind of like they're just out of the way, staying out of the way and letting you kind of do the thing?
It certainly goes both ways. As I say, we have what we would bill as real successes as countries develop. But I say we're just not necessarily claiming credit for that. So, in countries like Kosovo, for example, it's not perfect. Kosovo, the media freedom situation at the moment, but it's an awful lot better than it was, and an awful lot better than it is in some surrounding countries. And we've invested in the leading independent TV broadcaster and radio broadcaster there, and they have undoubtedly had, a major influence on the improvement economically and politically of their country. They're not the only factor, but it's certainly part of it. And we see that in lots of countries.
Wonderful. Yeah. I mean, as you mentioned, of course, just because you have independent press and freedom, that's not going to turn into 100%. Oh, great, we're a democracy. Not exactly how it works on that front, but I do think it plays a major tool, as a huge tool in the toolbox of that development, if you will, for lack of a better metaphor, because it really enables citizens and individuals, if they're given the right information from all sides, to make those educated decisions based on what they want to vote for, things of that nature as well. And it's a great empowerment tool kind of on that front, which I think is, invaluable to a lot of countries and to a lot of citizens. I think it's something that we take for granted that, like you mentioned at the very beginning, at least we have multiple news sources that we can kind of pull from and compare views, because that's not always the case. And it really is a luxury and a privilege.
Well, I totally agree with you. And I think it's easy to forget the importance of independent news and information across the board. So, in political terms, of course, in economic terms as well, but actually for all the Sustainable Development Goals and all the UN's SDGs, I would say are underpinned by free and reliable news and information. So if you are talking about, gender equality, if you're talking, about minority rights, if you're talking about hunger, poverty, say hunger, for example, Amartya Sen, the Nobel Prize laureate for economics, and also Joseph Stiglitz, another Nobel Prize winner for economics. Amartya Sen said, there's no country that he's aware of that has suffered a famine that has a free press. So it's a question of, holding the authorities to account, but also sharing the information so people can make rational decisions, and the people in positions of power make rational decisions too.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I didn't even think about that. I mean, you're giving information learning. I mean, that's another thing as well that people forget that you can read in the papers. People write facts based on research studies that they've read that are done in other parts of the world, that if you're even have an independent press that's free to report on that and create that, I mean, that's a power of knowledge. That's the definition of the power of knowledge, and another great impact that it kind of has on that front. And then, of course, for, women's health is something I can think of within the last 30, 40 years that has kind of kicked off and really progressed. And I'm sure that the news media probably played a big role in that, with just the ability to create information in some of these countries. Guatemala would be a perfect example of that, or something like that, where in some of these countries, like it has improved a bit and the information is improved. So I think that's great. Peter, kind of transitioning a little bit and to kind of move into it, what can people do to help you all out? Whether that's, following on social media, engaging on things like that, nonprofit, what type of ways can people donate and get on this as well? Because hopefully after listening to this a little bit, they understand a bit more about the importance of freedom of press and helping these people out and these organizations so that they can empower or be a tool to empower the citizens of these countries as well. So how can people kind of contribute?
So, like any other nonprofit, we're obviously always open to donations. But actually, the model for MDIF, the way that we work, our own model is business based. So we encourage investments. So people can invest anything from $1,000 in MDIF, and we will provide a return, of whatever percentage is decided on. It depends on the size of the investment, but an investment in us provides us with capital that we can invest in independent media around the world. We get some back, and we pass it on to the investors in MDIF. So just go to our website, mdif.org, and there are ways to invest in there, and just connect with us. And that's probably the best way directly for us. And there are so many urgent needs for independent media, for independent journalists around the world. This is our model, but there are other models. There are organizations that try and get journalists out of jail. or try and make sure that there's no impunity for murdering journalists. So whether it's CPJ or RSF, there's all sorts of organizations out there that I'm sure people can find. But if you're interested in the investment model and supporting the sustainability of independent media, then just check out our website and have a look for ways to support us.
There you go. Be a part of an investment, some ethical investing, if you will, on this front. So it's a fantastic way to, if you got some extra cash and you want to do some investments, to invest in the media of other countries and things of that nature. You can get a return on that as well. And I would encourage you to do some reading as well on some of these other organizations that are helping journalists get out of jail or helping limit violence or things of that nature as well, because that is a real problem in some of these countries on that front as well. Peter, I'd love to ask you as well, just for consumers out there. I know we briefly touched on it before, if you're in the US or the UK, and there's just this kind of intimidating, overwhelming climate of news sometimes. What are some tips that you would recommend to people, to consumers or whomever, to try to consume their news these days, both maybe on a local, national, global level? What are some tips and good practices to kind of digest news today?
I think for me personally, it's about the source. Just make sure your source is right. Trust the source. You do the initial research into who it is you get your news from, or if something just comes through your stream or whatever it may be, then just I suppose it's a mixture of skepticism. Check it out, make sure it's right, and then once you have some trust in that organization, in that provider, then you can start to consume sort of more openly. But I think everybody has to approach the media with a certain level of skepticism at the moment, unfortunately, and the problem of misinformation is just getting worse, and it's something that we all have to be aware of, particularly on social media, but not just on social media. So it's a question of, for me, mixing a bit of skepticism with, once you have that fundamental basis, then actually you can give some trust.
I think some good advice. Correct me if I'm wrong here. How about be your own journalist a little bit? Do a little independent research on yourself.
Nice.
Trust that source. Nice. Maybe find some others and compare and contrast and digest and create and formulate your own opinion, huh?
Yeah, I like it.
There we go. A little bit of that education paying off for me.
You can tell you studied some journalism somewhere along the way.
Awesome. Peter, hey, anything else that you would like to add that maybe we missed today? I know y'all got a newsletter, I think, at MDIF, which I would imagine would be a great way for people to stay informed. But anything else that you would like to add in general, just about the issues of independent and free press?
Well, I think we've covered all sorts here. I think it's just if it was one impression that I'd like to leave people with, it's just the broad nature of independent media, and for people not to be too scarred by their own experiences in their own country. That actually it's the importance of reliable news information is just it can't be overstated in so many countries in the world. And it's something actually we need to, all just get a little bit beyond ourselves, our own little borders that we're familiar with, and open our eyes to the bigger picture.
There's a whole entire world out there. Expand those lenses, get after it, and maybe you won't find as depressing news as either as well. You'll be able to find some positivity out there and some growth factors of people that are being enabled in way. And like you said as well, I think that's great advice to not get caught up in your own experience. I mean, news journalism, independent press has been at the forefront of uncovering some very bad scandals and some things that would have never been uncovered, and we would have never known had it not been for an independent press and things of that nature as well. So it's a tremendously important part of a democracy, of a society, and of the freedom of information and things of that nature as well. So Peter, thank you so much for coming on the show. I've really enjoyed this conversation and having you on, and I thank you so much.
Thanks, Will. I really enjoyed it.
That's the Director of Communications at the Media Development Investment Fund, also known as MDIF, Mr. Peter Whitehead, joining us here on the Talkin Solutions Podcast to talk about the fantastic work they are doing investing in independent media. And you can be an investor as well. If you go to their website, mdif.org, you can find out ways that you can invest into the fund, even get a return at that level as well. You can sign up for their newsletter to get more information. And as always, I encourage you to find out some ways to learn more about what independent media really is and what it means for some of these countries, because I do believe that it gets lost here in some, specifically the U.S. where I'm from, where we kind of take things for granted. I mean, as Peter mentioned, in China, there is no independent free press or anything like that. So there is no options there. So definitely make sure that you kind of understand the privilege, luxury you have there. And if you have an opportunity, invest a little bit in it and you get some money back in return for the great work that MDIF does. Of course, we'll have all the links available throughout the week on the website. And then, of course, within the social media as well. So that is going to wrap up this edition of the Talkin Solutions Podcast. I appreciate you all for listening. If you've got any questions, comments, or anything like that about this show, go ahead and contact me. I'd be happy to respond on that. And if you enjoyed it, always hit the subscribe button if you are looking for a good podcast for some positive news and great solutions on that front. And if you could, drop a rating as well. Until next time, I hope everybody enjoys the rest of their week. Thanks for listening to the Talkin Solutions with the Chesh podcast. Tune in every Wednesday for a new episode, and you can find out more about our featured guests and their solutions on our Talkin Solutions podcast Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube channels, as we focus on highlighting individuals providing solutions to social problems and bringing optimism to the world.